What's up to you all wonderful and awesome mindsetters? Thank you for tuning in. This is your favorite show where you learn more and learn extra. My name is Abram and today we're doing history with Mamsi. Mamsi, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you, Abram?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Tomorrow is the day for our mindsetters and I hope we're going to help them. I believe so. Are you ready to help them?
Yes, I am ready to help them.
And what are we doing with them?
Okay, so today we'll be focusing on paper 1 and we will be looking at selected questions from this paper. And I just want to stress that our focus is on skills. So if we run out of time and we don't get to your theme, because as you know, there are different themes in this paper. Don't worry, don't stress, you'll be fine for the exam as long as you know the skills, because that is what we want to teach you, how to tackle your exam.
Of course, that's more where the focus is, to help you guys with things that you're going to really need. But for today's show, also, you need to get your notes. If you want all our notes, go to learn.mindset.co.za. Otherwise, go to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/learnextra. Like the page, share the page, invite all your friends and tell them to come learn with us. Also follow us on Twitter @LearnExtra. During this show, I'll be telling you more also about the giveaways or some competitions that we have for you. But we just want to say we're grateful to MTN SA Foundation for proudly sponsoring this show and, of course, the Department of Basic Education for endorsing this program. So send your questions, your comments, your suggestions. I'm waiting. Let's learn, Mamsi.
Okay, thank you very much, Abram. As I said to you before, the main focus today is on the skills, how to answer exam questions. And obviously, we will be looking at paper 1. So we've got some selected questions here. So we're looking at the final exam preparation, paper 1. And in this lesson, we're going to revise the skills to answer different types of questions. As you know, that in history, you get different types of sources. You can get a written source, you can get a visual source in the form of a photograph or a cartoon, and we're going to show you how you have to analyze those sources and understand the questions. So that is what we will be doing, as I said before, in the context of paper 1 topics. And again, I just want to repeat that if you don't get to your particular theme, remember, it's not about the content, but it's about applying those skills when you answer your questions in the exam. Now, let's look at the different questions that we've selected in this paper. So question 1, source 1A. This source consists of a written and a visual source. I'm quickly going to underline that so that you can see the different types of sources, as I said to you, written and visual source. So we're going to start by analyzing our written source, and then we'll go on to analyzing the visual source, and then we'll look at the type of questions you're likely to get. Now remember, the exam will be slightly different from this because it will not be using exactly the same sources, but you will be applying the same skills. Now, if you look at the source, we're starting with the written source. There is a caption here that tells you what the source is about. And the caption says, I'm just going to highlight it quickly. This is the caption I'm talking about. Tells you that the source is an extract which explains why. It's very, very important. It's giving you the reasons why the Berlin Wall was constructed in 1961. So even before you read the source, you already know that it's going to give you the reasons why the wall was built. And then when we read the source together, I'm going to underline those things that are likely or are possible responses to the questions you are likely to get as to why the wall was built. Now let's quickly read the source together. The crushing of the Hungarian uprising had confirmed for many people in Eastern Europe that it was impossible to fight the communists. For many, it seemed the only way of escaping the repression. I'm going to quickly underline that because a lot of people felt that communism was repressive or oppressive, and that the only way of escaping the repression under the communist rule was to leave the country. So that is the problem. There were people leaving the country. And you will know in the context of the Cold War that for those communist countries where people were leaving, to go to the non-communist or capitalist countries, that was a brain drain, because those were the productive people who would have helped the economy of those countries. So it became a problem when those people were escaping to other countries. So they were leaving the country altogether. Some wished to leave Eastern Europe for political reasons. Okay, this is another reason. There were political reasons. Maybe they were not happy with this ideology of communism because they believed in capitalism. So there were various reasons why people decided to escape the communist countries. Ideological reasons, political reasons, and others left for economic reasons. They hated the communists. So those are the political reasons. They hated the communists. While many wished to leave for economic reasons. Now remember, I've already told you that there were others who were leaving because of the better prospects in the capitalist country. As the standards of living in Eastern Europe fell, that is very important, and that explains the economic reasons for leaving the communist countries. It's because the standards of living were dropping. The standards of living were dropping, and then people wanted better opportunities elsewhere in the non-communist countries. So they fell further and further behind the West. The attraction on going to a capitalist state was very great. And then another problem was that, if I can just scroll down, the contrast was particularly great in the divided city of Berlin. Living standards were tolerable in the east, but just a few hundred meters away in West Berlin, East Germans could see one of the prize exhibits of capitalist West Germany. The shops were full of goods. Okay, I'm going to quickly underline that. That is very important because it shows you the good life in the West. The shops were full of goods. There was great freedom there. There was wealth as well. And they could get variety of things, of goods that they wanted. It had deliberately been made so by the Western powers. Okay, because obviously in the Cold War situation, the Western powers wanted capitalism to be more attractive than communism, because that is what the Cold War was about. They had poured massive investment into Berlin. Now, if you had watched the lesson earlier on, you will have noticed that we discussed the Marshall Aid or the Marshall Plan. That was the pouring of billions and billions of American dollars to help the European countries recover after the war. So that is what this source is referring to by these huge investments that enabled the economies of the Western countries or sectors to develop and to be better than the Eastern sectors, because they had lots of money. That is why there was greater wealth there and variety. They had poured massive investment into Berlin. In the late 1950s, an increasing number of East Germans were going to West Berlin. Okay, we've already looked at that problem, that people were leaving the East for the West for better opportunities and not going back. See, this is another problem, that brain drain that I spoke to you about, that they were not just going to West Berlin to get goods and everything and then go back to East Berlin or East Germany to help that sector, but they would stay there because life was obviously better there. From Khrushchev's point of view, you all know who Khrushchev was, the leader of the Soviet Union at the time. The sight of thousands of Germans fleeing communist rule for a better life under capitalism undermined communism. I'm going to quickly circle this because that is the reason. They felt that the Russians felt that they were being undermined by the better life under the communist rule. So it undermined communism in East Germany and communism generally. So what did they do as a result of that? At 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, 13 August 1961, East German soldiers erected a barbed wire barrier along the entire frontier between East and West Berlin. They ended all free movement. So that is now the construction. Okay, they ended all free movement. This is pre-war construction. So they were trying to make it impossible for the people of East Berlin and East Germany to leave for the West. from the east to the west. This was quickly replaced by a concrete wall. So they started with the barbed wire, and then they constructed a concrete wall to make it impossible for the people to move. So that is our written source. If you underline and highlight the main points like that, then you will be able to answer the questions, because we've looked at the reasons why things happened, why the wall was erected, cause and effect. And then if you can quickly look at our visual source, because remember, this visual source goes hand in hand with the written source. Now, this caption again is very important. The visual source depicts Konrad Schumann, an East German soldier defecting from East Berlin to West Berlin. Now, this is a very important visual source because it shows you this East German soldier still in uniform. And that proves that he was still on duty, and he was so desperate. It shows the desperation that the East Berliners and the East German people had to escape communism. He is still in his uniform, as you can see. He is still carrying a gun, and you can see that this whole act of jumping over the barbed wire to West Berlin was a spontaneous act. He wanted to escape before the wall was built, because remember, the written source did tell us that the wall was going to be a concrete barrier. So you can see from this photograph that this soldier knew very well that if he did not use this opportunity, then he was going to be stuck in the East and not enjoy the free and better life in West Berlin. So those are the two sources that we've looked at, one written, the other one a visual source. And then what we're going to do, I'm going to hand over to Abram, and after that we're going to look at the type of questions you are likely to get from both the visual source, this photograph that we've analyzed, and the written source where we underlined and highlighted things. Remember, both sources are about why the Berlin Wall was constructed. One explains it in written form, and then the other one explains it in the visual form, as you have seen. So if you get questions like that, one written, the other one visual, you must bear in mind that they work together. Okay, over to you, Abram.
Thank you so much, Mamsi. Well, my sisters, let me tell you about this awesome competition that we have for you guys. It is a Be a Bright Spark competition. If you think you are a bright spark, all you need to do is to follow these simple 3 instructions. They are so simple. 1, buy yourself this official Safeways K53 Learners and Drivers manual. Secondly, or if you can't buy the book, or if you have the book, download the Cool Android app, which is available from Google Play. Second thing you need to do, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/learnextra, fill in an entry form there. And then lastly, like our Facebook page and like the Safeways Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Safeways K53. Guys, the closing date is the 15th of November, and the winner will be announced live right here on Learn Extra on the 23rd of November. So guys, get entering right now, because the closing date is coming very, very shortly. But for now, I think, Mamsi, we should take a break.
Yes,
We'll
we're
see
going
you
to
guys.
take a break, and then
Yes.
after the break, we'll do the questions.
Awesome. Get your notes during this break. We'll see you shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome back, awesome mindsetters. We love chatting to you guys, and we like hearing your questions and your suggestions. Guys, I must say that we must also help one another, encourage one another on the page, because we are a team together. Let's help one another. I have some questions for you, Mamsi, from the
Okay.
mindsetters. The first one is from Vuyani Karing. I just want to know if my handwriting is big then, and I'm supposed to write an 8-line paragraph. Is it going to be more than 8 lines? And what am I going to do? Or what if my handwriting is too small?
Okay, you don't need to stress about that, because if they give you an instruction saying write about 8 lines, that is just an estimate. Obviously, if you've written more than 8 lines, provided that what you've written is relevant, you will not be penalized. And obviously they say 8 lines because they don't want you to write 20 pages, 10 pages. It's just the guide. So you don't need to stress. Just make sure that you answer the question and you don't give irrelevant information. I hope
Right.
that answers the question.
I hope it does.
Okay.
I think it's simple enough, though. 2 questions from Khadija.
Yes.
Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Khadija, please tell us what is the Iron Curtain, and also please tell us which countries are communist and capitalist, where communist and capitalist is ruling.
Okay, do they mean now or during the Cold War? Because you
didn't
can't
specify.
say, you can't use, remember this is history, you can't use the present tense. Okay, I'll start by explaining the Iron Curtain. Now you remember that during the Second World War, the Soviet Union or Russia advanced towards Germany, okay, through Eastern Europe. And then what happened was that those countries, they had been taken over by the Nazis during the war. So when Russia got involved in the war, then they had to defeat all those countries, which means they fell under communism. And then on the other side, the Western Front, the Western allies, the United States, Britain, France, and so on, I won't mention all of them, they were also advancing towards Germany from the West. And where they met, okay, that is the East, Russians, and the Western allies. That is where the Iron Curtain is, which means that the countries behind the Iron Curtain fell under Eastern Europe, and then they became communist because they had been taken over by the Soviet Union, and then the countries on the other side of the Iron Curtain remained capitalist. So the term Iron Curtain refers to the invisible divide that divided the two ideologies, communism and capitalism. Okay, I hope that answers the question. In terms of which countries were communist and which were not, you just need to look at your map. I hope you all have the textbook. You look at the map, the Eastern European countries, okay, the countries closer to Russia that formed part of the Soviet Union fell under communism. As I explained before, that when Russia was advancing towards Germany, she had to take over all those countries. So those countries then became communist. But obviously, when communism collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed and communism ended, those countries became capitalist. We do still have a few countries that are communist today, but that is not part of our discussion and it's not part of what we're doing. Okay,
Awesome.
good.
Thank you, Mamsi. And guys, if you're still struggling, we're here to assist you, but do get your notes so that you can follow what Mamsi is doing.
Okay, thank you very much. Now remember, before the break, we look at the two sources that were on the reasons why the Berlin Wall was constructed. So we looked at the written source, giving the reasons, we highlighted all that, and then we looked at the visual source, that is the photograph of that East German soldier escaping the East for the West. And remember, I told you that it was a spontaneous act that took him and those around him by surprise, but he just did it because he knew that the wall was going to go up and he didn't want to be stuck in the East. Now let's look at our questions as I promised you. Now, remember, it's very important to look at to read the instructions. The first one says, refer to source 1A. So that is our written source. And they're saying, using the source and your own words. That's very important. So you are using the source, and your own knowledge. You need to define the following concepts. Historical concepts are very important, and you need to define them in your own words. Now that means that even if the definition is in the source, you need to try and define these in your own words. And then if you look at the first one, it's the Cold War. So they're asking you to show your understanding of this ideological conflict that existed between the East and the West from 1945 right up to 1989. See, I'm already giving you my own definition. But they are asking you to do it in your own words. That's very important. And then the next one is to define communism. So they just want to see if you understand these in the context of the Cold War, of what you're doing, before you can look at the reasons and the actual events. So let's quickly look at the possible responses here. And remember, these are possible responses because we all use language in different ways. Cold War refers to heightened hostilities between the USSR and the USA, characterized by aggressive, hostile propaganda and threat of actual war. It's very important to mention that the Cold War was not a physical war. Okay, they just threatened each other. Okay, they were fighting because of their different ideologies. I'm not going to read all the answers, but I just want to read this third one, possible response. Ideological war, as I said to you before, let me quickly underline it. Ideological war between the and the USA. So it was a war of ideological position to assume world domination. And as I said to you, I'm not going to read everything because there are lots of possible answers, and they do accept any possible answer as long as it is relevant. Now let's look at the next question. Why, according to the source? Now this is also important because it says according to the source. Okay, so even if you know it from your own knowledge, they're not asking you to give that, but they're asking you to analyze the source. Show your understanding of the source. So why, according to the source, did people want to leave Eastern Europe? Now remember, when we were looking at that written source, we underlined all the reasons why people would want to leave Eastern Europe. They left for political reasons. They hated communists. They also left, others left for economic reasons because of the lower standard of living in Eastern Europe, and others wanted to escape repression. We dealt with all these when we were analyzing that source. Let's look at the next question. List 3 reasons. Again, it's very, very important to read your instruction. You are just listing, you are not explaining. Please don't waste time. We know that time is always an issue in history because sources are often very long, okay, and there's often a lot of writing in other questions. So where you are asked to list things, please don't explain or describe them, just list them. So it's very important to follow those instructions. And then it tells you that you only have to list 3. So don't go and list everything that is in the source. You only need 3. List 3 reasons why East Berliners were eager to move to West Berlin. So in this case, and then you look at the mark allocation as well, it's 3 times 1 equals 3. So each point is worth 1 mark because you have to give 3 points. And you are taking them directly from the source. The living standards were far better in West Berlin. Shops were full of goods to support a good lifestyle. Life was easy in West Berlin compared to life in East Berlin. Prospects of getting rich were higher in West Berlin than in East Berlin. Again, that information is in the source. If you remember, we underlined all those things when we were analyzing that written source. So again, that question is testing your comprehension and how well you can interpret the source. Okay, and then refer to source 1A. Use the source and your own knowledge. So again, the instruction is very important. You are using both the source and your own knowledge. Explain why Khrushchev ordered the building of the Berlin Wall. Remember, the caption told us that those 2 sources, written and visual sources, were about the reasons why the Berlin Wall was constructed. Now this question, 1.4, is asking you to use the source and your own knowledge to explain why Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, ordered the building of the Berlin Wall. Now let's look at the possible responses there. East Berliners were leaving for West Berlin. The defection to West Berlin was undermining communism. Remember, I did underline that when we were looking at the source. And I told you that that was very important for the Russians or the Soviet Union because they did not want their ideology to be undermined. Because the fact that people were leaving for the West meant that they were not happy with communism. He wanted to impose communist rule over the rebellious East Berliners, and he did not want to see the demise of East Berlin, as thereby the demise of communism in Europe could follow. So in other words, he wanted to make sure that communism stayed. And then the next question, how does the visual source, now that is the photograph that we analyzed as well. How does the visual source, again, it's very important to look at the instruction. You are no longer looking at the written source, but you are now looking at the visual source. How does the visual source support, okay, the written source? Remember I told you that the first instruction you got was that source 1A consists of both the written and the visual source, which means those 2 sources work hand in hand. If for some reason you're getting 2 sources that are showing opposing viewpoints, the caption is going to tell you that as well, that these two sources are showing opposing viewpoints, and then you're going to have to look for the differences, contrast them, the biases, and all that. But in this case, you are using the two sources, and you are showing how the visual, the photograph, support the written source regarding the impact of the construction of the Berlin Wall. Okay, so in other words, how people were affected by the construction of the Berlin Wall. Now let's look at the possible response here. The written source informs us of defections to West Berlin, and the visual source shows us a picture of a person defecting to West Berlin. That is an obvious thing. You don't even need to go and look for metaphors and analyze and all that. That is what you see. It shows a soldier, that's what the caption said, jumping over the barbed wire from East Berlin to West Berlin before the wall went up. Both sources highlight the desire to leave East Berlin. Now remember, I told you that you could see from that photograph that that act of jumping over the barbed wire before the wall went up was a spontaneous one. And how do we know that? It's because the soldier was still in his uniform, which means he was still on duty, and he was still carrying his gun, and he also did not have any of his personal belongings with him. Because if he had thought about it beforehand, then maybe he would have carried a suitcase or some of his valuables with him. But he did not have those things. He was just there. His function was to guard the wall, the construction of the wall, to make sure that the people did not jump over. So the fact that the very person who was instructed to make sure that people were not jumping over was jumping over shows the desperation that the people had, that they wanted to leave the East for the West because of the better life in the West. So you need to look for all those clues that will help you understand the source. The visual source demonstrates the unhappiness of the people of East Berlin as described in the written source. Okay, I've already told you that it shows the desperation as well, that it wasn't just ordinary people who were unhappy, but even the soldiers themselves, the people who were supposed to have supported communism as an ideology and the government of East Germany were defecting. They were running away from this ideology. So it proves that there were lots of people who were unhappy. And that is the reason why the government and Khrushchev made a decision to construct the wall to prevent that movement of people from the East to the West. Okay, so I hope you understand how these questions are asked. Why do you think this photograph was taken? Okay, now I know that some of you might get confused here because the question is, why do you think? Remember, it is in the context of the Cold War. So you can't just say whatever you think. Why do you think the photograph was taken? Now let's quickly look at the possible response there. Defectors were determined to leave East Berlin regardless of the possible danger. Defection was a matter of life and death. Even soldiers and police defected. The source shows fear and sacrifice. As I said to you before, it shows that even those people who were supposed to have prevented people from moving to the West were so desperate that they took risks like that. Okay. So I hope you understand how we analyze those sources. I'm going to hand over to you, Abram.
Thank you so much, Mamsi, and thanks to you guys for your questions. We'll definitely answer you guys after this short break. Welcome back, awesome Mindsetters. Now we love learning with you guys, and we say that if you think you are a bright spark, you are ready for tomorrow, make sure that you don't just get ready only on your history, but also get ready for the competition, because you could win one of 4 cars that we're having. If you don't get to win on the 23rd of November, you could win next year. So guys, make sure that you enter. More information is on our Facebook page, facebook.com/learnextra. Over to you, Mamsi.
Thank you, Abram. Welcome back. So now we are going to look at a different focus. It's still the Cold War, but we're looking at the Civil War in Angola. Okay, so this source, this is 2B, this source explains the involvement of, I'm going to underline that, the involvement of the superpowers and their allies in the civil war in Angola. So that is very important, okay? The caption tells you what the source is about, and it's very important to note that there was already a war going on, and then the superpowers got involved, and that is how this conflict in Angola, or the crisis, became Cold War conflict. But initially, it was not Cold War conflict. There was a civil war going on, but it was the involvement of the superpowers that turned this into a Cold War conflict. Now, let's read the source together. The crisis in Angola developed into a Cold War battleground as the superpowers and their allies delivered military assistance. Okay, again, I'm going to underline that. That is very, very important. Okay, and we already know from the other sources that we've read that the reason why these two superpowers, that means the United States and the USSR, were willing to help all these countries, it was to spread their own sphere of influence. So on the part of the United States, it was to contain the spread of communism, to make sure that the Soviet Union does not dominate. And then on the side of the United States and the way the Russians interpreted what the United States was doing, they also wanted world domination, to dominate the capitalist world. So they were giving military assistance to the different sides that were fighting in this civil war. It's very important again to note that this was a civil war. To their preferred clients. Okay. Now, this is another very important point, that they refer to these different movements that were fighting as the clients because they were the ones receiving this aid. So they were treated like their clients. The United States supplied aid and training for both. Okay, I'm going to underline these movements, organizations, the FNLA and UNITA. Okay, so the United States was helping these two movements, while troops from Zaire assisted Holden Roberto and his fighters. China. Now, we introduced to China. It's not just the Soviet Union, but China as well, because you will know from your own learning that China was already communist by this time, because China became communist in 1949. So now, this is going to be a Cold War issue, because you have the United States already giving aid to those two movements, and then China is also getting involved. China also sent military instructors, okay, I'm going to underline that, to train their FNLA. And then you have the Soviet Union also getting involved, provided military training and equipment. Okay, I'm going to underline that because those are the two types of aid that were given for the MPLA. Now, already you can see that the United States is supporting the different side to the side supported by the Soviet Union, and that is how this is going to become the Cold War conflict. During the summer of 1975, the Soviet-supported MPLA was able to consolidate power in Luanda and oust the US-supported FNLA from the capital. But the FNLA continued to attack. The remaining Portuguese troops failed to stem the violence. Okay, now you'll remember that Angola used to be a Portuguese colony. So they were unable to get rid of this violence. When MPLA leader Agostinho Neto announced November the 11th, 1975 as the day of Angolan independence, that's another thing that we need to note, that Angola gained independence in 1975 because the Portuguese government could no longer deal with the violence there. Lisbon, that is the capital city of Portugal, decided to withdraw its troops on that day. And then, if you read on, the MPLA also had long-established relations with Fidel Castro's Cuba. Yet another communist country is getting involved. This is now Cuba. Okay, before November 11, the MPLA had negotiated with Castro for Cuban assistance. At the same time, UNITA, which enjoyed the US support, approached the apartheid government in South Africa. Okay, this is getting more and more interesting because you now have South Africa also getting involved for military reinforcement, for obvious reasons, because this conflict was in Africa and South Africa was closer. Okay. Pretoria, the capital city of South Africa, with the aim to end the use of Angola as a base for rebels fighting for the independence of South Africa-occupied Namibia. Contributed forces that entered southern Angola in October and made rapid progress toward the capital. In response, Castro sent Cuban special forces to halt the South African advance and succeeded. This is very important because it says that Cuba actually succeeded in stopping the South Africans, okay, because remember the South African government had already sent its troops there, but Cuba, the Cuban special forces, succeeded in halting the South African advance, okay, and drawing attention to the fact that the United States had provided support to a group that now accepted assistance from an apartheid government. So now you can see that this was not just a Cold War issue, but it affected South Africa as well. So that is our written source. Now let's look at the questions that you're likely to get there. Using the source, mention which liberation movements were supported by the USSR, USA, and China during the conflict in Angola. And as you can see here, it's out of 3 marks. That means you have to mention each country, USSR, USA, and China, and then give their liberation movements that they each supported. Now let's look at the possible response there. So you can answer it exactly as it is done here and say the United States supported UNITA and FNLA, whereas the USSR supported the MPLA and China supported the FNLA. And that is a straightforward comprehension question because you're just extracting information from the source. So if the question looks easy, don't think that it's a trick question because it is there to test your understanding of the source. Now let's move on and look at the other possible questions. Using the source and your own knowledge. Remember earlier on I did tell you to read the instructions carefully. So in this question, you're not only using the source, but you're using your own knowledge of the event as well. Explain why the source refers to the various movements in Angola as clients. Now remember when we're analyzing the source, I underlined that word clients. Okay. Of the superpowers being the Soviet Union and the United States. And then the possible responses there. The superpowers use the various movements to advance their external interests in Angola. So this was their way of spreading their own spheres of influence. That is why then these different movements that were fighting in a civil war in Angola were referred to as clients because they were receiving the aid from these superpowers. The movements were used to fight the proxy wars. Okay, I'm quickly going to underline that because some of you might get confused. Okay, proxy wars refers to the wars that were fought by other people on behalf of the superpowers. Because what happened during the Cold War was that the superpowers would get involved in a civil war and support one side against the other. So that is war by proxy. That means the superpowers are fighting each other, but they are not facing each other directly. They are just using other people to fight each other. That is a very important concept to understand. Okay, so the proxy wars that characterized the Angolan Civil War. So in other words, Angola became a battlefield or an example of a war by proxy. These movements depended on the superpowers for support and resources. Again, we looked at that source and we said the different superpowers were giving military and financial aid to the different fighting groups in Angola. So that is the reason why they were referred to as clients. Okay. And then if we quickly look at the next question, using your own knowledge and the source, again, you're using your own knowledge and the source, give reasons why South Africa became involved in Angola. Again, this is a comprehension question because the answer is actually in the source. Okay, if you go back to the source, you will see that it tells you why South Africa then became involved. Let's look at the possible responses there. South Africa felt threatened by the presence of a socialist government north of Southwest Africa, that is Namibia. Okay, now remember the source did say that Namibia was controlled by South Africa. So South Africa was worried that they were going to lose Namibia if the communists took over. So they wanted to make sure that the communists did not take over. So the United States was also getting involved to stop the spread of communism, and then South Africa became an ally of the United States in their attempts to stop the spread of communism. And then another possible response is they were threatened by the presence of Cuban soldiers in Angola for obvious reasons, that Cuba was run by a communist government. So obviously, if they are supporting one side against the other, it means that communism is spreading to Africa as well. And that was going to threaten South Africa because they were worried that eventually South Africa might have fallen into communism as well. Remember the domino theory or the domino effect, that if one country falls into communism, then the next one will also follow, and the next one, like a set of dominoes. So that is the reason why, or one of the reasons why South Africa got involved in this conflict. They attempted to prevent the expansion of communism in Southern Africa. So these 2 points work hand in hand because, as I said to you before, the fact that there were communists in Angola was a threat because it meant that communism was going to spread to different parts of Southern Africa. They wanted to cut the supply lines to SWAPO, that is the organization in Southwest Africa or Namibia. Remember, that was controlled by South Africa. So they wanted to make sure that Namibia remained under South African control and free of communism. Okay, because remember that when the Portuguese left Angola, the communists took over, and that was a problem. So it looked as if communism was going to spread to different parts of Africa. So it was very important for South Africa to make sure that communism is contained. It doesn't spread to different parts of Southern Africa, including South Africa. So that is the reason why South Africa became involved in this conflict, which started as a civil war. Okay, I hope you all understand how to answer those questions. And then this one, source C, shows the return of a regiment of the South African Defence Force, SADF, from Angola. The writing on the white banner reads, "Welcome winners." So it is showing the South African soldiers, so it's showing the South African involvement in Angola, and it is showing them as the winners. So they're saying that, hooray, South Africa won this conflict that was going on. They were able to triumph over the Cubans in Angola. But if you go back to that written source, remember I did underline that point that the Cuban special forces succeeded in stopping the South African advancement, which means that this photograph, because you might get that question later on, we'll look at the questions later on, but you need to know that this photograph is not portraying exactly what happened, because they're saying that the South African troops are the winners, whereas the written source told us that they were actually stopped by the Cubans. Okay, so after the break, we're going to look at the question based on, or questions based on this visual source as well. Over to you, Abram.
Thank you so much, Mamsi. And Namasi on the page, the Mindsetters really can't wait to get to the essays. Guys, we're getting there. We're going to give you all those tips and make sure that you guys are ready for your test tomorrow. So stay tuned. Welcome back, awesome Mindsetters. Now we have some questions for you, Mamsi, from the Mindsetters. Maria and all other Mindsetters are asking this same question. If I do the essay question, can I use the source? That's the first one. And others are asking, Do we answer 2 essays or 2 sources or one of each? And the last one is, how do I know if the source is reliable or not?
Okay, so can I start with the first one? The first one was, can you just repeat the first one?
The first one, if I do the essay question, can I use the source?
Okay, now the way you answer questions in any exam, you read the instruction. If the instruction says use the sources to write an essay on the following topic, then you use the sources, and in some cases they can say use the sources and your own knowledge. But if you're not told to use the sources, that means that you have to rely on your own knowledge. That is where studying comes in. You have to study. So please don't use the sources unless you're instructed to do so. Okay, I hope I've answered that first question. And then the next one.
Do we answer 2 essays or 2 sources or one of each?
Okay, there has to be, you have to have 3 answers, overall answers. So you have, for both paper 1 and paper 2. But you have to make sure that one of your questions that you've answered is a source question and the other one is an essay. In other words, you cannot end up with all source-based questions and no essay at all. One of the questions that you will answer has to be an essay. So there is no choice in that matter. But there is a choice in terms of the essay topics because they will come from different themes. So you can choose the theme that you understand better, but you will be expected to write an essay.
I think we're fine for now.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, there was another question earlier on about the reliability of the source. Now, if you look at this one, it says we're not going to look at all the questions based on the sources we did before the break, because I hope you all get the idea now of how we answer the question. But I like this one because it is looking at the limitations of the source to an historian studying the Angolan Civil War. So this is where you will say things like, well, this source is reliable, and there is a difference between reliability and usefulness. A source can be useful, but not reliable. Useful means that the source can be used. In other words, there is enough information in the source to understand the event. But then when they're asking you about whether the source is reliable or not, that means, can the source be trusted? So can we believe the information that is in the source? So that is where you can say things like, no, this source is not reliable because it is biased. That means it is one-sided. Or it doesn't give the full picture of the event. Or it has a lot of emotive language, okay, which is also a form of bias. It uses a lot of propaganda techniques, and it's left out a lot of important information as well. But it is still useful because it can show you something about the event. So I hope you understand the difference between those two terms. A source that is not reliable does not mean that it is not useful. It is useful because you can get information from it. However, it can be reliable because it cannot be trusted because of all the things I've mentioned, like propaganda, emotive language, and so on. Now, if we look at this question, just to quickly help you with that before we move on to the essays, because there are quite a few questions on the essays. Okay, so we're looking at the limitations. Now, it's very, very important to look at your questions again. As I said to you before, this question is asking you for the limitations. Now remember, sources have both value and limitation. So value will be the good things about the source, and then the limitation will be the negative things about the source. So that is where we'll say things like it is biased and all that. But in this case, you're only asked for the limitations of the source, the shortfalls of the source to an historian studying the Angolan Civil War. Now, let's look at the possible response quickly. I'm not going to spend more time here. It is biased. We know that because we're referring to that photograph showing the South African Defence Force returning from Angola. Remember the caption saying, "Welcome winners." Okay, it is biased because it does not give a full account of the South African Defence Force's involvement in Angola. The South African Defence Force is portrayed as the winners a fact that is highly disputed. There's no evidence. They have not given us evidence that these people were winners. They're just saying that they were winners. So it is some form of propaganda. The military vehicles are entering a SADF safe camp and are being praised. South Africa's performance in the war has been less than glorious. So it's the same information, that there's no evidence that these people did win. And again, if you compare it to the written source, remember we did say that the written source said the Cuban forces succeeded in stopping the South African advancement into Angola. So it is not true that they were the winners. Okay. Now, this one is exactly the same as the other question we've done already. How does source C support source B? So that is where you compare the two sources and you look for similarities. Again, if you need more information, you can go on to the website and you will get information from the notes there. But I'm not going to look at it because it is of the same idea. What I'd like us to move to now, we're going to look at the essay questions, because there seems to be a lot of questions around the essays. Now, before I look at this particular question, I'd like to remind you that when you're writing your essay, it is very, very important to have an introduction. You already know that. You have the body of your essay, which is divided into different paragraphs. Remember, one idea, one paragraph. You can't jumble up your ideas. And then you have a conclusion where you sum up your main points. That is very important. If you've got that structure right, you are likely to get a very good mark in your essay. So in terms of essay writing, the first step is choosing the correct essay. So obviously you're not going to spot, you're going to learn different sections. Now, how do you choose the essay question? You choose the one you understand. Make sure you understand the essay question by analyzing the question. Why do you analyze the question? You want to find out exactly what you are being asked to do. Now, let's together analyze this one. Says discuss, that is your instruction word. It's very, very important. To what extent Vietnam was successful in preventing the United States from imposing a capitalist system in the 1960s and 1970s. So, as I said to you before, okay, we're going to look at the possible response here, but this is just the points that you can include in the body of your essay. Now remember, in your introduction, you need to take a position. I need to see the extent when I read the introduction. If you are going to argue that it was to a large extent, or to a small extent, or to some extent, that has to be in your introduction, because the purpose of the introduction in an essay is to show the scope. So in other words, you tell us about this conflict in Vietnam and the US involvement. That is your scope. And then another thing you need to show in your introduction is the direction your argument is going to take. So even before I read the entire essay, I need to know where you are going with this argument. Are you agreeing? If the question is, do you agree? Because you get different types of questions. Remember, this is just an example. This one has got the extent. So as I said to you before, I need to see as a marker, I need to see the extent. So if the answer is, it was to a large extent, don't only say that in the conclusion. You say it in the introduction, and then throughout the body of your essay, you prove that it was to a large extent. That is where you provide the evidence by now looking at the different events and the different points that prove your point of view, that is, to a large extent, Vietnam was successful in preventing the United States from imposing a capitalist system in the 1960s and 1970s. Now, before we look at these points, because remember the points, they will show you the introduction, the body and all that, but they are not written in an essay form. You've written essays before. You know that you have to write in full sentences, you have to write in paragraphs, and as I've already told you, introduction, body divided into different paragraphs, one idea, one paragraph, and then the conclusion. Now you already know what the introduction does. It gives scope and direction, and then the body gives evidence that supports the point of view that you've taken, and then the conclusion, you sum up your main points. Please don't rewrite the essay in the conclusion. Remember, both the introduction and the conclusion have to be plus minus 10 lines. If your introduction or your conclusion are more than 10 lines, that means you've included a lot of background information or evidence that should be in the body of your essay, and you are not focusing on the question. And another very important thing you need to remember when you're writing a conclusion to your essay, remember I said to you, you are summing up your main points. You may not give new ideas that have not been discussed in your essay. That is why it is very important to plan your essay before you start writing. Because if you don't plan, what will happen is you'll write your introduction, write the body of your essay, and then only remember things when you write the conclusion and then include them there. Then that is no longer a conclusion, because the purpose of a conclusion in an essay is to sum up the main points. Now remember this when you write your exam. If it is not in the body of your essay, it cannot be in the conclusion, because the conclusion concludes your essay. It does not introduce new ideas. I hope those tips are going to help you. Now let's quickly look at the possible response here, how you can answer this particular question on whether Vietnam was successful. Okay, let's start from the top here. Okay, now you can see these are just marking guidelines. Candidates should focus on the conflict between Vietnam and the United States as an attempt to withstand the United States imposition of capitalism and rejection thereby of Vietnam between the 1960s and 1970s. This is where now I said to you the scope of your essay is found. And then the main aspects are the introduction. The introduction should focus on the involvement of the United States in Vietnam and the rejection thereof by the Vietnamese people. Must briefly outline the line of argument. I'm going to highlight that or underline it briefly, very, very briefly, because it's not yet the essay. You're still introducing it. Your line of argument. It's what I referred to earlier on as the direction your argument is going to take. If the question is to what extent, I need to see the extent in your introduction to a large extent. If the question is do you agree, I need to see in your introduction whether you agree or not without using personal pronouns. Remember, you never ever use personal pronouns anywhere in the essay. Okay, you may not say I agree. You can use things like, it is evident from this event that the Vietnamese were successful. Okay, or it can be concluded that the Vietnamese were able to drive the United States out of Vietnam, or anything to that effect. But you never ever use personal pronouns. And then this is how you elaborate in the body of your essay. So these are all the points. Again, I'm not going to read all of them because there are too many. You can get them in the notes that are on the website if you want to see how you can elaborate, because this is all content. Remember, I told you when we started that today we are focusing on the skills. So all this information will be in the body of your essay. And remember what I said to you, that it's one idea, one paragraph. So you give the main idea of that paragraph and then you elaborate on that paragraph and show the extent, because you have to focus on answering the question. So these are the different points that you are expected to have in the different paragraphs of your essay. Remember, you cannot discuss all of them in one paragraph, as I said to you before. That is very important. And then the conclusion, you now need to tie up the argument with a relevant conclusion. This is where you are now summing up. You are not rewriting the essay, remember, and you are not including new ideas. I hope those tips have helped you. Over to you, Abram.
Thank you so much. That is very helpful. If I was you, mindsetter, I would be writing these down because tomorrow you're going to be thinking, what did Mamsi say? But if you are clever, I know you guys are clever. You have them handy, so they're going to help you guys. After the break, we'll take on more of your questions. Welcome back, my sisters. You just heard Looney telling you more about the K53 competition. It is a Be a Bright Spark competition. It's simple, guys. As she told you, 3 steps. 1, you need to buy yourself this official Safeways K53 Learners and Drivers Manual or download the Cool Android app available from Google Play. Secondly, like our Facebook page and Safeways Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Safeways K53. And lastly, fill in the entry form on our Facebook page, facebook.com/LearnExtra. You could be that winner on the 23rd of November. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you, but enter, do yourself that favor. For now, Mamsi, I have another question which is adding to what we spoke about on essays.
Yes.
There seems to be a confusion to the mindsetters in terms of what is the best way of answering the essays. Should I choose 1 essay or 2 essays and 1 source? How do I know which one is the best for me?
Okay, what I would say to you is that you know yourselves. You've written exams before, internal exams. If you're a good essay writer, then that means that you can choose 2 essays. But please don't try something you've never done before. If you know that you have never done an essay on Vietnam, don't do it for the first time in the exam. You need to choose that essay that you have done before. If you know that you struggle with essay writing, then you only do 1 essay and do 2 source questions instead of doing 2 essays. Even if they look easy, they might not be easy because you have not had practice. So that is how I would approach the exam.
That makes sense. No surprises. Don't surprise yourself, and more especially the examiner.
Okay.
Let's move on.
All right. Thank you very much, Abram. Now, I'd like us to look at another example of an essay question that you are likely to get in an exam. Now, this one is slightly different from the previous one in a sense that this one has a quotation. Okay, so it's got a quotation and then it's got an instruction. It says, if you can read it together, after gaining independence, many African countries were faced with varied possibilities and constraints. Okay, I'm quickly going to underline those 2 words, possibilities and constraints. Okay, so just to simplify that, you could say the positives and the negatives with regard to their own development. And also another thing that I'd quickly like to underline is that this tells you the time frame that you are looking at. You are looking at the countries, the African countries, after gaining independence. So it's only the African countries. So you are not looking at them before they gained independence. So if you get a question where there is a quotation like this, it is very, very important to deconstruct that quotation to make sure that you understand all the different bits and pieces within that quotation. Because remember, it was chosen for a reason. You cannot just ignore it. Okay, because in your essay, you will be expected to refer to it. That is how you will argue. So this quotation is guiding the way you are going to argue, because if you only discuss the possibilities and you leave out the constraints, that means you have not dealt with this entire quotation as it is given to you. And then the instruction is, do you agree with the above statement? Sorry, that's the question. Now, remember I said to you, even if the question is, do you agree? You never say, yes, I agree. You never use personal pronouns, but the way you phrase, your introduction and the rest of your essay will show the marker whether you agree or not. Okay, don't spell it out and say, I agree or I disagree. Never do that. Okay, do you agree with the above statement? Critically discuss, I'm going to underline that as well, this statement. Now remember, I did say to you, the statement is there for a reason. Don't ignore it. You are discussing the entire statement, not just the possibilities, not just the constraints, but everything in the statement. So that is the reason why it is very important to deconstruct a statement. Remember that when you get an essay question, or if you choose an essay question that has a statement, make sure you understand that statement. So don't think that just because you understand this part, which is the question part, that then you will be fine, but you have to understand the statement as well, because you will be referring to it in your answer. Okay, by focusing on the economic successes, okay, quickly going to underline that. Let's use a different color now. Okay, so you have to discuss both the successes and the challenges. Now remember, our statement looked at the possibilities, okay, I'm going to re-underline those, and the constraints. So the question now tells you to focus on the successes and challenges that both Tanzania and the Congo faced. So this is a comparative essay where you are looking at two countries, and for both you are looking at their successes and their challenges, which means that you cannot just take a position that they were only successes and they did not have challenges, or they only had challenges and they did not have successes. Okay, it's very important because the question guides you. It tells you that you have to look at both the successes and the challenges, as the statement above mentions that there were possibilities and constraints. So now let's look at the possible response that you might get. And remember, I say to you, it's a possible response because there are obviously different ways one can answer a question, but using the same content. Now remember, the structure is still the same. Okay, candidates must focus on the successes achieved and challenges. As I said to you before, you can't just choose one. You're looking at both the successes and the challenges faced by both, because that is what the question tells you, that you need to look at the two countries, not just the one, with special reference to the economic sector. Okay, now they're telling you that you have to look at the economic sector. That is what the question requires you to do. Okay, so don't start looking at the political sector or the social sector, but the economic sector. So you need to contextualize your response, okay? That is what you're expected to do, and indicate whether you agree or disagree, again, without using those personal pronouns, as I've said to you, that there are different ways of showing whether you agree or disagree. Because remember, this is a history essay. It's not creative writing. You never, ever use personal pronouns. The introduction should focus on the comparative nature of the essay. So in other words, you are looking at both countries. Please don't just look at one and then think that later on in your essay you're going to discuss the other one. No. In your introduction, remember I told you earlier on that the introduction is there to give scope and direction. So I need to see in your introduction that you will be discussing both countries. You can't just mention one in the introduction and then mention both in the body of your essay. Okay, because then your introduction will have no direction. So it says introduction should focus on the comparative nature. Okay, let me quickly underline that, because we are looking at two countries here of the essay where the different economic achievements and challenges of the two countries are discussed. Okay, so they were different because that is why they were chosen, because these countries chose different routes after independence. So the challenges would also be different, and the successes. And then this is how you elaborate. You look at Tanzania, and you look at the concept of Ujamaa, and that is the implementation of African socialism. So these are all the points that you are going to include in the body of your essay. I'm not going to go over all of them. Okay, you already know them, and if you don't remember, we did say earlier on that you need to go and look at the notes on the website. They are going to help you there. Okay, so you all know how that was done. Remember, one idea, one paragraph, okay? And then, so that first part was about Tanzania, and then you move on to the next part, which is now about the Congo. Okay, the Congo, as you will know, adopted a different system after independence. Okay, they were capitalist, whereas they, in Tanzania, adopted a form of African socialism. That is why you're comparing these two, and you're looking at the different challenges they face, because they both faced challenges, but they were different because of the way they implemented the different reforms after independence. Again, I'm not going to read all these points. As I said to you, they are already there in your notes found on the website, but this is just to give you an idea of what you can include there in the body of your essay. And then when we move on to the conclusion, you now need to tie up the argument. Again, I'm going to underline that because it's very important. Okay, with a relevant conclusion. And remember what I said to you before, that this is a conclusion. You are concluding your essay. That means you are not giving new information, and your conclusion has to be in line with your introduction. Remember I said in this particular question, your introduction has to show both countries. You can't just mention one thinking that you're going to mention the other in the body of your essay. So the conclusion has to be exactly like that, that when you tie up, you are not only summing up events or successes and challenges only for one country, but you are doing that for both countries. So you will say, okay, these were the successes and challenges for Tanzania, and then you quickly tie them up, you summarize because it's a conclusion, you're not rewriting your essay, and then you do the same thing. And the Congo, these were the challenges, and then that will be your essay, the conclusion for your essay. If you're really, really struggling with the conclusion, because some people struggle, and some other people will struggle with the introduction, others struggle with the conclusion. So if you've written your introduction, you've written your essay, and that you don't know how to conclude, just look at your introduction, and it can be written in a similar way. The only difference is you are going to start your conclusion a different way to your introduction. So you'll write to sum up, or in conclusion, or to conclude, or it is evident, or it can be concluded that, and then you sum up all the points that you are expected to sum up. Okay, I hope all these skills have helped you, and as I said to you, all the notes are found on the website, so you will be able to look at the content, because remember, today was not about the content, it was about the skill of writing. Now remember, we looked at how you analyze the sources, and we've looked at how you write essays, and also how to make a wise choice. So please make sure that you read the instructions carefully, you look at the mark allocation, that is very, very important, and whatever choice you make sure that you choose wisely. And good luck. Thank you
so much. Before I let you go, Mamsi,
Yes.
quick questions for you. Please let me know if I would get more marks if I include more details, more dates in my essays.
No. You will not get more marks if you include more dates. History is no longer about dates, but it's about how you can argue in an essay. That is what we're looking for. Okay, so please don't go and memorize all the dates. It's no longer about that. It's how well you argue. But if you do include the dates, make sure that you include the correct dates. Don't make them up. Okay.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And I know that the Mindsetters are not going to disappoint you.
That's
Thank you so
good.
much. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that you get your notes on land.mindset.co.za. In case you missed this show, it's going to repeat at night, so make sure that you catch the repeat. But for now, thank you also to our sponsor, MTN SA Foundation, for making sure that this show is possible for all of us. And of course, the Department of Basic Education for endorsing this program. Guys, we love you and we wish you nothing else but the best for tomorrow. Peace.